Hi there, this is Mischa. I trust you all are well. Today, my guest is Alan Green. He's an associate professor of clinical education at USC. Among other things, we're going to talk about the fact that his twin daughters just graduated from USC. So, how exciting, right? Let's hear what he has to say. I want to just give a little bio of you because it matters to me. I know you don't like to make a big deal of yourself, but I just want to share, I did in my introduction that you are an associate professor there.
I actually just got promoted to full professor.
Oh, stop it. All righty now. We got the first news. Amen. Good stuff. So are you still clinical education?
Yeah. Still clinical
Okay.
professor, but I went from associate to full.
Wow.
And it's official July 1, but I recently was promoted, yeah.
Amen. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And you also served there as the student liaison, athletic student liaison to the president of the university.
Well, yeah.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And then before that, you were at New York University, and before that, you were at Johns Hopkins University?
Johns Hopkins, and then NYU first.
Okay.
NYU first, then Johns Hopkins, then USC. Yeah.
Okay, so you came from Baltimore here.
Yep.
To California.
Yep.
Okay. And when you were in Baltimore, well, I'm sure you did some pretty phenomenal work in New York as well, but you also did some pretty phenomenal work in Baltimore with a lot of the different organizations that you were associated with. Can you tell us a little bit about, just your experience with the community development and community organizing of it all?
In Baltimore?
Okay, where did you go?
I'm here.
Can you see me? I can't see you. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I see you.
There we go.
You see my screen? Okay, yeah, I see you.
Yeah. Just to kind of give us some context of your work.
Yeah, but did I hear you correctly when you wanted me to focus on Baltimore, or?
No, I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about what you did in Baltimore. And because one of the reasons I asked that is because we know, you and I know, Baltimore is a needy city.
Yeah.
It has had a lot of trauma, and it still is going through a lot of trauma. And so to have been able to penetrate that and, make your mark there is a good thing. Sure. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I would say, there's definitely a lot of, like you say, trauma and need in Baltimore. There's also some serious healing and some activism and power and community organizers, and that's sort of how you and I actually met, was through some of those networks there. But yeah, so I'm originally from, I don't know if you want the, I'll give you
the go ahead.
Quick version of me. But I'm originally, it's hard to just describe it because I'm a military brat. Like, my father was in the military, and he met my mother in Europe because she's from Guyana in South America. And I was ultimately born in Roswell, New Mexico, believe it or not. And all this is kind of relevant in that. So going from there to growing up in places like California, and even living in Europe and Germany and England as a young guy. When I came back to the States in around middle school, early almost high school, it was like I had this weird experiences of just Blackness and the world, and that kind of impacted both my education and my development as a young man, and which then led me to go to college in Northern California, and then started grad school there, but ultimately found myself at Howard in DC, needing a stronger Black experience than I was having in Northern California, which just opened up the world for me even further because I was able to tap into my West Indian roots, the global African diaspora, and Black folks from all over the world, of course, but also more importantly, the United States. And that's kind of where I think I started to find my way in the work of positive Black human development, focused mostly on males, academic achievement, and mental health. But I started working in Washington, D.C., doing psychotherapy with a private practice, mentored the late Roosevelt Martin Johnson, who just really embraced me and taught me about psychotherapy from an Afrocentric perspective, working with the DC court systems and private practice, but also kind of getting involved with community organizations and trying to bringing my perspective to healing and development. So from moving through DC, then I ended up in New York for a while, doing a postdoc at NYU and spent some time there. And then in 1999, I got the opportunity to join the faculty at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And over the course of the next 10 years, in addition to developing my my academic practice, faculty career, I started working with organizations like the Urban Institute, the Urban Leadership Institute, which is how you and I met, and several other organizations, community-based organizations, and ultimately became a department chair for a little bit, as well as an associate director of the Urban Health Institute there at Johns Hopkins, and doing some really great work with people like Michael Lindsay, who is now, at NYU, and others there in East Baltimore. And I met a young woman there at the time. I met a young woman there at Johns Hopkins at the time. Her name is Nadra Tyus, and she currently works for the NIH, and she's part of the Public Health Corps, and she's a committed, public health professional. And we became close professionally and kept in touch. And when I got to LA, when I was moving to LA, she goes, "Hey, there's a guy out there that I need you to meet. You all have like minds, and he's awesome. And he's got a great organization," because she was reviewing, evaluating grants and all that. And so she connected me to this brother named Pete White, who runs what's called Los Angeles Community Action Network here in LA. And if you don't know about him, please check him out and his work and his organization. I'm actually on the board there, and we had a board meeting last night, and he was kind of updating us. They're located in Skid Row, and they do some great work. And so that's been my latest continuation of kind of doing, connecting with the community, empowering, leveraging what I have available to me here at USC and elsewhere. But also working with a lot of schools. I'm getting a lot of calls this week to come talk to parents, come talk to high school kids, come talk to our teachers, that kind of thing. And so just trying to, whatever sector it is, trying to bring my vision for Black healing and Black being. And particularly in this time of pan-rebellion, that's my new term. It's a rebellion.
Is that your new term? Tell me about that.
That's kind of how it is, right? We're in the midst of a rebellion in a pandemic, and they're related to each other in many, 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 many ways. And so I'm both trying to continue to do the work that I do, both with athletes, with my students, with my colleagues, and of course with my own self and my family, my children in particular.
And can we just pause for a moment and celebrate your two daughters, your two beautiful daughters, who just graduated from USC? Hats off to you as a dad, hats off to them for doing the heavy lifting of getting through college.
Well, I would say, of course, proud dad, that you couldn't have said anything more relevant than that, because you give me a second here, of course, I'm a proud dad. I'm proud of them, and not only their accomplishment.
Yay! Look at them! Look at them! They are absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. Proud of them. Proud of them. Yeah, sort of taking advantage of the opportunity to go to USC and moving on with their careers to grad school and that kind of thing. So yeah, definitely worth a pause. And I also have two beautiful sons, a 19-year-old Alan and a 28-year-old Jason, who are also, doing great and trying to be well at this time.
Mm-hmm. I want to segue into, you called it the Pan Rebellion, which You know, I'm going to continue to repeat that term. Um,
Please.
we are, what, 3 months into, a little over 3 months into the pandemic with over 100,000 people dying. And now we are, what, about the 5th day into the rebellion, into the looting, the protesting, the rioting. I want you to, do me a favor and look at it through 2 different lenses. One, I want you to look at it through the lens of a Black man. And then 2, I'd like to have you look at it through the lens of a clinician and tell us what you see.
As a Black man, I see a lot, right? I see a lot of energy. So I've got to be kind of abstract, but not too much. I see a lot of energy, and I see a lot of old energy, and I see a lot of new energy, and I see a lot of, I see, it depends on what I look at, right? Because I can look at a lot of negative energy, and I do at times, either to stay informed or I get pulled into it, or I also just kind of need to balance it out. But I got a call the other day from a dear friend of mine, brother, a big, strong, Black, African-American man who's a father, who's a husband, who's God-fearing, who's hardworking, who's from the streets of Oakland. And he was in tears. And I don't mean just like, wiping him away, he was bawling. And he was describing how he had been having nightmares. And last time we had talked was a couple weeks ago, he had been telling me about some nightmares he was having, but they were just abstract and random. But then, we lost Brother George Floyd for the whole world to see. And it ignited this energy that we're living with. That's the rebellion part of the Pan Rebellion. And and so as I listened to him, as I empathized, as I sat there patiently with maybe 6 minutes before my next meeting. And if I had to miss that meeting, I would have. But I was like, how can I be present for him right now? And I listened and I heard what he was sharing with me, and I validated it, and I, acknowledged it. And then this is what I kind of told him. I was like, look, he and I go way back, and we've been through a lot together. And so I was able to kind of get right into it with him, after, again, validating where he was. And I said, there's a lot going on, and he's an accountant, right? Mm-hmm. And he actually does taxes. He does my taxes. And some of the language that he uses when we're talking about tax situations, or whether it's, filing or making decisions, he always describes them as scenarios. And he's like, well, we have this scenario here, and we can do it this way, and this is what that's going to mean, and this is what this is going to mean, and these are the ramifications, and I need you to think about that. And that's how he's talked to me for years, as he's been my guide for those business and kind of financial matters. And so I employed that thinking with him in that moment, because I knew it was what he would relate to, and I knew what he and I related to. And I'll close this with the kind of like what this means to me. I was like, look, man, what you're describing, this nightmare that you keep having or you've had, and it's connected to some real life experiences of yours, I don't want you to forget about them. I don't want you to dismiss them, but that's just one possible scenario. And there's actually, unfortunately, a decent percentage chance that it could actually really happen, right? We know that, we see it. But there's also a really good chance, more likely, that it can't or it won't happen. And just for the mere purposes of taking care of yourself, even if you have to lie to yourself, focus on some different scenarios. Focus on all the many other scenarios you got in front of you. And, that not to mean that you're not going to lapse back into this, not to mean that you're going to forget or what have you. And so long story short, he got the message, and I said, love, you got to move on. I'll get back to you. And of course, I text him later, and I think it wasn't until the next day he got back to me. He says, I'm nowhere near where I was, but I'm, still got some stuff, but I'm good. Thank you, love you. And, of course it wasn't me anyways, he was like, he had his beautiful wife and very supportive and that kind of thing. And today he texted me a picture of the beach. He was somehow or another, he lives in Riverside or, out in the Inland Empire. And he texted me a picture that said, hey man, me and my wifey, we're at the beach.
Amen.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like there was like not social distancing. They probably pulled up and just drove for a while, pulled up, took a picture. So I say that to say, as a Black man, I just try and deal with this energy in and out. I try and pull in, I try and pull out. Sometimes I do it in healthy ways. Sometimes I stress myself out. And I'm always trying to improve and hopefully model for my kids and others how to do that too.
And so, I appreciate your honesty around that, because even as a clinician, even as someone with a doctorate, there's this expectation that you should always know what to do, how to do it, and do it right at the right time. So I certainly appreciate the honesty of that. And like you, like your friend, I had my moment yesterday. I woke up and I just kept hearing George Floyd calling for his mom, who, as we know, has been deceased for 2 years, and my sons are 32 and 35, and just can't even begin to wrap my mind around what that would be like. And I just cried like your friend. And at first I tried to manage it myself, and then I called a friend of mine like your friend called you, and I didn't say anything. I was just crying, and he's saying, Shay, and I said to him, he asked me, was I okay? And I said, I'm not okay, And so it's certainly been heavy, but what is the gift in it is being able to have people that we can be honest and real with. Yeah. Because I don't care how smart you are and how many degrees you have and how much money you make. If in fact you have a heart, this hits the heart.
Ooh. Ooh. I got goosebumps. I got goosebumps for what you just said, just because there's this reggae song by a group guy called Midnight. And Von Benjamin is his name. He recently passed away a couple months ago. And he says, if you have a heart, something like, if you have a heart, let it rule over every other subject part. I know what you said was, this is hard, right? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
But I heard heart. If you
no, I said it was hard, but if you have a heart, it's hard.
Yes, right. If you have a, yes. And in that song, he says, if you have a heart, let it rule over every other subject part. Mm-hmm. So while you're saying having a heart makes it harder, what came to my mind is that, but if you have a heart, you can move beyond this.
Oh yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And you're also going to, you're going to feel.
Yes.
Because that's what the heart does, right? It lets us feel. So you're also going to feel. Now, give me what you see through a clinical lens.
Well, so it's not going to be much different.
Okay.
It might even be a little anticlimactic, because over the years, the first client I had was in grad school. And my very first practicum, sit down and learn how to listen to somebody. Mm-hmm. The young man told me he wanted to take his own life. It was a baptism by fire. And the hopelessness and helplessness that I felt in that moment, he was looking to me for help. And here I am just trying to figure out how to say, thank you for telling me that. Or if I'm hearing you correctly, he not only he jumped into it right away, but we were in them. And so I never forget how powerful the opportunity is to be in a clinical therapeutic role with somebody else. And so I've always kept that with me, as well as some other experiences that have made me really be humble about myself, my role as a clinician, or as my training as a clinician, including this idea of being a wounded healer. And we can talk about that at some other time. But Another experience I had was I did have a client where he, early on in my doctoral training, who, was on my list to see, and he never came in and I never made it out to him. I think I went one time and it turned, the address was a bogus one, or I think the house was actually burnt down. And a couple of weeks later, he was like 12, 13 years old, and he had gotten murdered on the streets of Washington, D.C. And that tore me up. And it tore me up to see at his funeral the way in which his family was already distraught, and how that kind of, all of that. So, my work as a clinician is informed by my training, but it's also informed by my being and my approach to life overall. And then I think I'm like, I used to say when I was practicing, I'm a therapist in spite of my training. There's a lot of what I've been taught, whether it's how to diagnose or how to write treatment plans or how to use therapeutic skills, is all that is like not enough. Yeah. And so here's how my take on what's happening now. It's like I use the heart and the mind, like the balance. So it's in clinical terms, they describe it as cognitive behavioral therapy. So focusing on your thinking and your feeling and your doing, and the combinations between those two, and then add an existential kind of like world, like why am I here? What's my purpose? What's our purpose to that? And to keep it short, I think the best way to describe how I think about this, it sounds corny, but when I was at the Door, I don't know, there's an organization in East Baltimore called the Door.
Yes, I remember the Door.
Yeah, and myself and Michael Lindsay, again, someone else who, like I mentioned him earlier, but if you check him out, he's doing some great work up at NYU. He's the chair, or the principal of a very important research center at NYU in social work on poverty, and he studies trauma amongst mental health and trauma amongst adolescents. But anyways, he and I were running a group, psychosocial group, with a group of young kids at the Door. And we used music to communicate with them. We first started, hey, bring us what kind of music you're listening to. Our whole purpose is to explore your decision-making and problem-solving skills and, help you out and blah, blah, blah. And so they brought in their music. I think back at the time it was 50 Cent and whoever else was popular back in, what was this, like the early 2000s. And then we brought in our music, right? Mike's from DC. And I'm
the Go-Go?
He had his Go-Go, exactly. He had his Go-Go, and he had, it was Chuck Brown, and I'm a reggae guy, and I'm a hip hop too, but reggae as well, and soul. So I was bringing in some Bob Marley at the time, and what have you. So I found at that time, at one point or another, we built, not only did we like hear them and they heard us, we built the kind of rapport that I remember one day we were talking about Frederick Douglass being, like afraid to let people know that he could read because they would kill him for it. And one of the kids stood up in his chair. He said, "You mean," in his best East Baltimore slang, which I won't even attempt. He said, "You mean to tell me I got arrested the other day for not going to school, and back in the day you would be killed for going to school?" And look, I could see the look in his eyes right now at this moment. And so I knew then again about music. And so therapeutically, what's going on now for me clinically, therapeutically, there's a beautiful song by Damian Marnie, Bob's youngest son, and it's called Looks Are Deceiving You. And I mean, I don't know how you're going to use this piece, if you're going to, whatever you're going to do with it, but if you can find the lyrics to that, Damian in it really kind of lays out that looks are deceiving you. And that sounds like you know what that means, but he just, at one point in the song, I think he says something like, well, the hook is, looks are deceiving you. Now, don't you underrate yourselves. Looks are deceiving you. Don't you underrate yourselves. Oh, looks are deceiving mankind, so feel good about yourselves. Oh, looks are deceiving you, and always be proud of yourself. And he's having this conversation in the song with an angel, and he's like, the angel's telling him that, and he's like, but look, it's crazy. He says, no, looks are deceiving you. And he said, and the most powerful part of it for me was somewhere in there where he said that, oh gosh, just give me a half a second. I'm reading it, but something about that, you know, your judgment has sort of already been written. And here, the angel told me the judgment we face is, in regular terms, already written, only if we choose to believe it. He says, God loves us all too much to ever let us burn in hell. They had to keep that a secret. And I'm not trying, you know, whatever your faith, whatever your perspective, you know, this is reggae music, which is going to, you know, handle all of our spiritual kind of dimensions, whether it's Christian or what have you. And so I use that as a clinical sense of all. So I know it sounds crazy, but in a clinical sense, it means that this is like, this too shall pass. And how do we take care of ourselves? Much in the same way I talked to my buddy, to focus on making the right decisions to take care of ourselves or to protect ourselves or what have you. I don't know if that's what you're looking for I don't know if that's clinical enough, but I would try to deliver that message to my clients, to people from a therapeutic clinical perspective, but using that foundational message.
Okay. No, I'm not looking for anything in particular except the truth of how you feel, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, this is about having a conversation with a Black man who loves Black men and Black people. And I know you have some feelings about where we are. And in addition to that, just wanting to celebrate who you are, you know, because we get so much on the news about who Black men are not.
Right.
That I know so many amazing Black men who are doing great work in the community and their home and with their families. I wanted to just take some time to highlight them. At the same time, I want to ask a question about the Central Park incident and the way in which we see people like this woman weaponizing language to entrap Black men. You know, these code words of harassment, threatened, I felt threatened, I thought he had something. We hear this language over and over and over again. And at the same time, we're constantly saying to our sons, as I'm sure you said to your sons, you know, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. But now it's like you really, really need to be even more cautious and careful, because she was in broad daylight with a video on her and made a call that was a lie. Right? So tell me a little bit about the weaponizing of the language that, like I said, is really, really threatening the lives of so many Black men. And what's that about?
Well, I'm going to try and be more direct with you and answer my reply to this question. As I don't think it's, from the way I see it, it's not necessarily the weaponizing of language. It is, and I understand what you mean by that. Like, you're using language to describe someone in a way that's a weapon because they have offended you, right? It wasn't even that she was threatened. It was she was offended that this Black man had an audacity to tell her what to do. And yes, in the one sense, she was using language on the phone to the police as a means of punishing him for speaking out of turn, right? So if we can agree on that. But I also feel like it's not the weaponizing of language, it's a language that's a part of a cultural, like, being, a society in existence that in and of itself is a weapon against Blackness.
Okay.
So the very grammar, so this is what Afro pessimists or whomever you want to call say, it's not just how you, because you know, you talk about self-respectable or whatever, Black folks, like a kid who's got a 4.0 GPA and he's on his way to college and he gets murdered by some cops or something, and people were like, but he was a good student, right? And somehow justifying what happens to someone who had all D's and F's is like, okay, right? And we know that that's not true. It's the very meaning of what life is and what death is, that's at the foundation of this language in this society that is anti-Black. It's not like we have a neutral language and she just happened to lean over to the anti-Black side. Our way of thinking, the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about the world is defined as death in the white sense, right? Not that we think we are buying into it. Sometimes we get caught up in it, and it's some people call it a social death, like socially we are dead. That in white terminology and whiteness, Black is death, but Black is dark, white is life, white is, what's the opposite of community? The opposite of community is Black. It's ghetto. It's like, and it's a way of the mind, the Western mind has been programmed to see the contrast between me and the other. And I don't know if that's too much, but I mean, so she wasn't weaponizing her language. She was just caught on video, as with the tragic death of Brother Floyd, the experiencing what's been called the Black social death of Blackness. The beauty about that is there's an idea of the social life of the social death, because in spite of that, we have each other. We have Black Twitter. We have so much that fuels the spiritual and cultural creativity of the entire world, even the white world. So don't get caught up. And I'm not saying that Black is death. What I'm saying is that there's this idea that Black is death, that we have to transcend. And it's not just simply a twist in the language. It is the language, the world. Yeah, I don't know if that would be my response to that.
Okay. Could we talk about, because I know you believe in this and you just you mentioned the word of healing. Can we talk about healing? Can we talk about what that looks like? What conversations should we be having? Because you just mentioned the word transcend. And if it's about transcending anything, it's also about healing as much as we can. And I love conversations in terms of healing. I find talking through things to be very healing. And I was wondering from you, what do you think has to happen in terms of healing? What are some first steps? What are some conversations we need to have? Who needs to be having them?
Everyone, all of us, right? So they've been talking lately about this idea of going from the cutting edge to the bleeding edge. But really, this idea of going from the bleeding edge to the healing edge. And for me, healing starts with self-awareness. And just because I say this doesn't mean that I'm actively and engaged in it all the time or enough. But it does speak about avoiding avoidance and facing and engaging in healing in a way that faces the kinds of things that we're either afraid of or we don't know how to deal with, and that kind of thing. So it starts with that. And as I mentioned earlier, this idea of the wounded healer, which is something that sort of those of us who call ourselves healers or engage in that kind of work have to really understand that we're only doing it to heal our own wounds. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're aware of it and understand when you're getting in your way.
Yeah.
So Yeah, healing is um, it's magical. It's a journey, and both guiding it and experiencing it, and uh, the work of Octavia Butler, and this book Octavia's Brood that's come out about her work, I think really talks about what's known as visionary fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking outside of the box about what healing and you know what post this world, this post pan rebellion looks like for Blackness, for Black people, for Black women, for Black children and men. It requires being a visionary, but also being very present and mindful of what's going on right now, and willing to not only face it, but reach out to others and do like what you're doing now, and sharing and praising and all those kinds of things.
Amen. Amen. Last question would be, I'm a big fan of gratitude. I believe that gratitude changes everything and it makes life richer. It helps us to be just more appreciative, even for stuff that we sometimes can take for granted.
Sure.
What are you most grateful for today?
Today, I was about to say, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah,
You saved me. As soon as you said the word gratitude, I think about my mother. Recently, lost her in the beginning part of this year, and being with her in her final days. I'm grateful for not only that experience, but all of those experiences of my life with her. And I just so happen to be sitting at my desk here with looking at a picture of my father. So I could say the exact same thing about him for different reasons, and being grateful for 1,000 other things. But with my regard to my mother and gratitude is that I watched her, from my earliest days of knowing who I, being alive, being aware, conscious, to her final days, and watched her and all that she did for me and my family and herself. But in the end, towards the end of her, prior to her transition, she was dealing with dementia and that kind of thing. So there were some moments where she wasn't herself, but then there were some moments where she was more herself than I'd ever seen her since I was a child. And she was recounting kind of what she was transitioning, and she was checking to make sure that everything that she had worked hard for was in place. And she was asking me questions about who's in the house, how many bedrooms do we have? Do we have enough money? Do we have enough food? As if she was going to work for the day or something, and she was checking to make sure everything was okay. And I finally, but then she was asking me these questions about where's so-and-so, where's this person, where's that person? And I realized that she was just doing an inventory on and making sure that she had done everything that she was supposed to do.
Wow.
And then after she transitioned, and I got a chance of, I always talk about Black folks not being, or people who don't take care of their business and leave their finances a mess, and they don't blah, 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 blah. Well, my mom, that wasn't my mother. My mother took care of business to a T.
Wow.
She didn't have a whole bunch of money, but she took care of all of her business. And my gratitude is for seeing and experiencing that woman who is my mother, like, do all of that.
I love conversations. I do. They matter. We learn so much about each other when we talk. And I hope that in addition to the conversations you're watching me have with other people, you are also having conversations with people. Stay well, and I will talk with you again next week. Bye-bye.